What do you need to make a really great movie? This was the question the big shots of early Hollywood had to answer when faced with the challenge of sound. Well, to begin with, you need a location. Then you need an actor, a handful of props, and of course you need a script, something to really get the drama cooking and grab the audience. Oh, I know it, darling. And I am gonna quit.
And when I do, you quit that nightclub, too.
And as you can see from this first all-dialogue movie, that was the problem with talking pictures. The talking. But as soon as song and dance were added into the mix, well, that was something else entirely. Music was the magic ingredient that opened the door to a world of colour and exuberance that made the movies truly come alive.
Movie musical is life-enhancing. It's poetic. Just the idea that when you can't say it, you've got to sing it or you've got to dance it.
It's all about storytelling, and what better way to say you're in love.
Musicals gave us some of cinema's greatest songs. Some of its most iconic stars. Some of its most unforgettable scenes. Through the universal language of music, they captured our hearts and lit up the silver screen. In this series, I'm going to take a deep dive into the world of the movie musical. I'll be meeting some of its biggest characters.
It turned out to be a remarkably memorable moment. Levine said, I love it. If you change the name, Jews are not going to put Hitler on the marquee. I said, okay, Joe.
Filmmakers who took on the challenge of the musical.
Norman plays the car wash theme. I said, it's over, it's a hit.
2, 3, 4, 5.
I'll show how dance was choreographed for the screen.
5, 6, 7.
Not just in Hollywood, but in Bollywood.
In order for a film to do really big business, you have to appeal to a lot of people of Indian origin, Pakistani, Bangladeshis living all around the world. They must all love the film.
And I'll examine some of the most iconic songs in movie history.
The seaweed is always green, a very rhythmic da-ba-dum-ba-boop.
And see how even today, the glamour of song and dance can be a surefire recipe for Hollywood's success.
It's about that feeling that you can try and create between two people and that conversation they can have without ever saying a word. That's the magic.
Movie musicals are expressions of pure, unadulterated pleasure. But more than that, for my money, they're the reason moving pictures were invented. Because they speak, or rather sing to us, in a way that no other genre ever could. Our story starts not in Hollywood, but in New York in the 1920s. The razzle-dazzle of the Great White Way, Broadway. Almost 150 musical revues opened here during the 20s. Audiences were captivated by beautiful stars and magical song.
365 South 3rd Street. Almost everybody on that block had a destiny. They were destined to go to 7th Avenue and work in the garment center. One night, Uncle Joe, he says, I've got 2 tickets to a Broadway show. It's called Anything Goes by this new composer, Cole Porter. It was 1935, I was 9 years old. 2 tickets. The last 2 seats in the second balcony, you know? You couldn't get further away from the stage. And then when Ethel Merman came out and sang Anything Goes, it was too loud. No mics, but I said, but you got a big voice, Joe, you know? You're the top, you're the Coliseum, you're the top, you're the Lou music. I mean, it was just, it was just, I couldn't stop crying from happiness. And then when we left the theater, I said to Uncle Joe, I said, Joe, I ain't gonna go to the garment center. I'm heading right there for Broadway.
Of course, in the 1920s, not everybody could get to Broadway. And for American entertainment to take off across the globe, Broadway would somehow have to get to them. Well, with the arrival of a radical new technology, it did. And how? In August 1926, the Vitaphone system was launched in New York. For the first time, pre-recorded sound and the moving picture could be perfectly synchronized. A glorious marriage of music and the movies. In a mere 3 years, 2,000 short films were made to show off this technological revolution. But Hollywood studios had their eyes on a much bigger prize. All singing, all dancing. That was the ambition. And that became the catchphrase for the first full-length, proper movie musical, 1929's Broadway Melody. It opens in the heart of American song, a publisher's office in Tin Pan Alley. And cleverly, it takes us through a whole variety of different musical styles, as if to say this movie will have something for everyone. But Broadway Melody wasn't a stage show transferred to film. This was a completely original movie drama with brand new songs written specially for the storyline.
You were meant for me. I was meant.
And this moment is making history in cinema. We have a scene with a young man and a young girl in a hotel room, and he's just singing to her. And this song, You Were Meant for Me, is so relaxed that it works. You heard my first two lines that I played you there. This is the third line, and would you believe it starts on the same note as the first two? Continual fall down, then it repeats that again. It can barely be bothered to get back up to that top note. It feels very laid back, and of course that means it fits that moment in the hotel room. This is not a number to be sold across the footlights. In fact, it couldn't be. So it makes that intensity of their relationship at that particular moment absolutely real. And that's the trick movie musicals are going to be pulling off for the rest of their history. At a time when it cost only 35 cents for a cinema ticket, Broadway Melody ended up taking over $2 million, an extraordinary sum for the late 1920s. It also walked off with only the second ever Academy Award for Best Motion Picture.
Here comes the bride now.
And it introduced an ingredient that would be vital to the future success of the musical film, the showstopper. With the song Wedding of the Painted Doll, the sheer spectacle of the Broadway musical had reached a whole new level of cinematic sophistication. The bar had been set. Get it right, Hollywood moguls realized, and the movie musical could be their studio's golden ticket. In the wake of Broadway Melody, producers went all out to capitalize on its success. The premiere of MGM's Hollywood Review of 1929 was audaciously promoted with scantily clad dancers on a human billboard, bringing New York traffic to a standstill. And boy, did this glittering review have a showstopper up its sleeve, a star-packed finale shot in the new technology of Technicolor. Over 20 years before Gene Kelly would make it his own, here are Joan Crawford and Buster Keaton with the classic Singin' in the Rain. By 1929, music had taken over the movies. In that year alone, 9 of Hollywood's top 10 grossing films were musicals. The following year, the stakes were raised yet again. A full-colour movie musical that aimed to capture all the sophistication and vibrancy of the jazz age. It was partly inspired by one of the most sophisticated compositions of the age, George Gershwin's magnificent Rhapsody in Blue, and it was called King of Jazz. The ambition and sheer filmic imagination of King of Jazz knew no limits. Gershwin's masterpiece getting the no expenses spared treatment with an almost surreal riot of colour and stage design.
King of Jazz. I mean, you are literally on another planet. These massive showpieces of fashion and splendor and stagecraft. It's completely over the top. I don't know what the budget is. I still don't. What was that line in Citizen Kane? The cost of Xanadu, no man can say. It's probably true of this movie, too. You do not know what that cost was.
In principle, King of Jazz had everything. Brand new 2-strip Technicolor film, beautifully recorded orchestral arrangements, and sets so outrageous that director John Murray Anderson was on the verge of being fired as the shoot went over budget day in and day out. Did all this lead up to box office boffaroo? Well, no. It was such a massive financial disaster that the film became known in the business as Rhapsody in the Red. And maybe there's a reason for that. New York in the 1930s was home to the great African-American band leaders who pioneered jazz music, among them Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington. But neither they nor any of their musicians appeared in Hollywood's homage to the form. Instead, the role of musical director and star of King of Jazz was given to the popular dance band sensation, Paul Whiteman.
Think of MTV back in the 80s as a jazz orchestra. That's what Paul Whiteman's orchestra was. Even though at the time, there were a lot of other orchestras, who were at work, white and black, who were doing some of the same things and in many cases doing them better. Unfortunately, because the country was segregated, most of the white people who heard jazz music in those days could only hear or only had access to the kinds of things that Paul Whiteman was doing.
Little bird in the branches above is plaintively heard.
But I should mention the single appearance of an African American in that movie, which is really bizarre. I mean, it comes at the end of this scene, and all of a sudden you see this child, and she's grinning, and she is so happy to be on the lap of this lovable, portly, jolly man. In the largest sense of the word, it's tokenism. Okay? And, you don't know what to make of it.
Let my people go.
By the start of the 1930s, 1 in 10 of the American population was African American. But African American performers weren't just absent from King of Jazz. Their crucial contribution to American culture was pretty much absent from the movie musical as a whole. Studios profiting from a bright new world of entertainment and escapism had little truck with social realism. But there was one pioneering filmmaker who wanted to change that, who felt the spirit and tradition of African American music should be recognized with an entire movie devoted to it. His name was King Vidor. King Vidor was one of Hollywood's top players, critically acclaimed and signed to the mighty MGM Studios. In 1928, fresh from an Academy Award nomination, he pitched his next project to the studio's president, Nicholas Schenck. It would be set in the Deep South and feature an entirely African-American cast. Schenk was wary, but Vidor was bold and determined. So determined that he offered to forego his salary if Schenk would match it, dollar for dollar, in order to raise the budget. The resulting movie would be called Hallelujah. Hallelujah's subject matter was a great leap forward for the movie musical. Not an all-singing and dancing revue, but a melodrama of passion, love, family and religion. At its heart, it's the simple tale of a cotton sharecropper who falls from grace and is redeemed. But this was a passion project for Vidor. He recalled how, as a boy growing up in the American South, he'd heard his sister lulled to sleep with spirituals. And it was his foregrounding of this traditional music that made Hallelujah so remarkable.
Because he was from Galveston, Texas, and because he did have a sense of black cultural life around him when he was growing up, he wanted to bring, as best as he could within commercial limits, what he had heard and seen among the people that he remembered. It was considered unique, and a lot of people really embraced it. It is raw and it is direct, and the movie feels as real as people back then probably thought it was.
Vidor imagined Hallelujah almost as a work of documentary. In a drive for authenticity, the film was shot on location in Tennessee and Alabama, with many of the cast members local and non-professional. Yet, how authentic was it, really?
Mammy, we're almost through with the picking.
Yes, sir.
Hallelujah is the Black Panther of that day. I don't think that African Americans were as bubbly in the 1920s as the film portrays them. Bright-eyed, smiles. It was a time, of course, when African Americans were bereft of some very humanities. So I do think in some ways that the film sanitized African American experience.
In fact, many of Hallelujah's songs, such as Waiting at the End of the Road, were written specially for the film by the Broadway composer Irving Berlin.
Musically, it definitely lacked authenticity. One, Berlin was an Anglo-Saxon writer, and he wasn't familiar with the African-American experience enough, because you have to be African-American to even associate with the type of oppression that inspires a spiritual or a gospel.
Hello, my friends, I'm coming there too.
Coming for to carry me.
Hallelujah was released into an America where the day-to-day realities of life were becoming ever more at odds with the vibrancy and exuberance of the early film musical. When the stock market crashed in 1929, ushering in the Depression years, there was every chance that the sheer expense of producing such lavish spectacles would see the movie boom itself go bust.
You could have your choice of a dozen shows. A pretty girl like you?
Mm-hmm. Not with this depression.
The Great Depression had hit America hard.
Did you ever hear of Wall Street?
In the struggle just to survive, people had turned to desperate measures.
Come on, turn around.
If you could just win some money, you could get ahead of the pack.
Stick with us, kid, and you'll come in on the tide.
For those in search of a fast buck, the competitive world of showbiz seemed a golden opportunity. Dance marathons proliferated, and thousands more turned out to audition for the stage. They were the easy pickings. And as it happens, the work of art that best caught this febrile atmosphere was a movie musical.
Say, Jones and Barry are doing a show.
That's great. Jones and Barry are doing a show.
Jones and Barry are
The story of a Broadway production, 42nd Street was no run-of-the-mill backstage musical. It had cinematic and social ambition to boot.
Jones and Barry are doing a show.
In 1933, America's buoyant new president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, promised a new deal to get the country back on its feet again. Warner Brothers Studios proudly boasted that 42nd Street would be a new deal in entertainment.
Luxurious settings, spectacular dance routines, set to the rhythm of inspiring music, in scenes never before attempted on stage or screen.
In a stroke of marketing genius, they sent a train with its stars across country, stopping off at towns and cities to plug the film, arriving in Washington on the very day of Roosevelt's inauguration. And what made 42nd Street the granddaddy of all backstage musicals wasn't just ever more lavish sets and a cast of hundreds. It was the first flowering of a unique visionary. Choreographer, director, and one-man creative genius, Busby Berkeley.
Oh, that's Busby Berkeley on his flying trapeze. Buzz, this is Miss Howson. Mr. Berkeley.
So glad to know you, Miss Howson. Another candidate for the chorus?
No, just a visitor. But I've often wondered where you get all those beautiful girls.
You do, huh? Well, they come from all over. You see, they might come from California, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Texas. It really doesn't matter. See, there are beautiful girls everywhere.
If you think of any song and dance number from before Busby Berkeley came on the scene, they're largely shot as if you'd been given the best seat in the theatre. You are looking directly at the stage.
Say, I know a bundle of humanity. She's about so high.
And the action happens as if on the stage. Often they were shot with several cameras, so the same action could be intercut. Wide shot, details of hands and feet.
I'm young and healthy, and so are you. When the moon is in the sky, tell me what am I to do?
What Busby did was tear all that up. Use just one camera, but make that camera an all-seeing eye that could roam far and wide, create shapes and angles. And perhaps most famously, shoot directly from above.
He led the way. Something about cinema being able to give you an extravaganza, an experience that you couldn't have anywhere else. And I think that was very important at the time.
On the avenue, I'm taking you to 42nd Street and the beat of dancing feet.
Busby Berkeley proved that there was something else to be had in the movie musical, which was a new idea, which was the camera dancing. And the camera taking us on a journey that was impossible to see anywhere else. And the thing we all love at the end of those numbers is a sort of curtain comes across at the end, doesn't it? Or something, as if it's all happened on a stage, which is sort of really charming as well, you know, the fact that we're supposed to think that.
It wasn't just the staging of the musical numbers that made 42nd Street stand out, but the way that their melodic sophistication worked seamlessly with a story populated by unscrupulous and highly streetwise characters.
I can't.
Look here. You can't, but you will.
Warner Brothers didn't just allude to the callous hardships of the Great Depression. It was the very inspiration behind their huge success with movie musicals.
Sawyer, you listen to me. And you listen hard. 200 people, 200 jobs, $200,000, 5 weeks of grind and blood and sweat depend upon you.
And in the follow-up to 42nd Street, the none too subtly named Gold Diggers of 1933, we see this right from the off, with a number that couldn't be more sardonic if it tried.
We're in the money, we're in the money, we've got a lot.
The great Ginger Rogers introduces a chorus line clad in dresses made from oversized coins, jauntily singing, "We're in the money." On the surface, it's another regular Busby Berkeley parade of dancing girls, But this is not mere entertainment, it's social comment.
That guy right in the eye. Oh, we're in the money. Come on, my honey. Let's land it, spend it, send it rolling around.
Gold Diggers of 1933 ends, and what an ending. My Forgotten Man.
Remember my forgotten man. You put a rifle in his hand. You sent him far away.
It's a blues number. Listen to this opening line. Straight up from the Mississippi Delta, that line, and then followed by a wonderful kind of pulsing blues rhythm. Can you hear it? It's not just blues, that's a march. Those are marching feet. This is a deeply political and angry number. It's making the point that the men who joined up to fight the war are now the ones who cannot get the work. And to use blues in this way means it's a hook. We hear that 2 or 3 times, which means it goes straight in. This is the one you're going to come out of the cinema singing. But then listen to how it resolves. It's dark, it's tragic. Every race, every class of American has lost men in the war and now has men who cannot find work and their families are starving. The most extraordinary thing about this, apart from the fact it's a blues, is that Gold Diggers was such a massive success, and this number in itself, part of that success, that it saved Warner Brothers from bankruptcy. So, in the midst of the worst depression ever known, with a number which drew attention to that depression and the people who were potentially responsible for it, it also saved a major Hollywood studio from going under. The power of cinema as a tool for propaganda might have been unusual in Hollywood, but on the other side of the world, in the Soviet Union, it couldn't have been more crucial. Throughout the 1920s, so-called agit trains travelled the length and breadth of the country, equipped with phonographs playing rousing nationalistic music and a dedicated cinema carriage where citizens packed in to watch films promoting Soviet values. In 1923, the country's first major film studio, Mosfilm, was opened. Soviet Supreme Leader Joseph Stalin commanded there should be cinema for the millions. Indeed, in 1930, he'd banned Hollywood products and instigated a new dramatic realism into cinema, which was supposed to talk to the working man the same way as the agit films of the 1920s had. Unfortunately, the working man wasn't interested, and Stalin had a guilty secret. He loved Hollywood movies. All of his homes had a private cinema in which he would sit back, relax, and watch his favourite stars, John Wayne, Charlie Chaplin, and the extravagant flights of fancy of Busby Berkeley. And he was nothing if not shrewd. He saw something significant in the movie musical which bypassed the spoken word of the heavy message dramas in favour of the shared, joyful language of music and movement. The filmmaker tasked with delivering on Stalin's challenge was one Grigory Alexandrov. Fresh from a brief spell in Hollywood, his first musical, breezily titled The Jolly Fellows, was a light-hearted romp, but it completely transformed the look and sound of Soviet cinema.
Alexandrov wanted to find a field for himself in which he would be, a newcomer, a pioneer. And this is what he gained in Hollywood. When the Jolly Fellows were released, the film was at risk of being banned because it was too silly. We are building socialism, we should make more pathetic films. And then Stalin loved the film, and then Alexander was really commissioned to make a series of such films.
And so Grigory Alexandrov became more than just a filmmaker, but a crucial messenger for the spirit of communism. And nowhere is this more evident than in his next film, Circus. When this film came out in 1936, Stalin was about to embark on the Great Purge, a ruthless political exercise in which hundreds of thousands of suspected dissenters would be routinely hauled off and shot or sent to the Gulag. Well, you'd never glean that that terror was happening from the cheery inclusivity of Circus. Not only is the female lead an American woman who's somehow found herself in the Soviet Union, she's been hounded out of her own country because she's had a mixed-race baby. The film says that the West is intolerant and actively promotes the Soviet system as somewhere where people of all faiths and colours can live the perfect life. Circus is a movie musical of inclusivity. So iconic is this picture in Soviet film history that it was recently restored and colorized. And it is a marvel, seamlessly combining the iconography and ideology of the Soviet Union with Busby Berkeley-style flights of fancy. And you don't just see this on screen, you can also hear it. Now, that little waltz we heard right at the beginning of the film, it's the circus music. And throughout the movie, there's mostly been recognizably Russian popular or folk music. But when we come back to that again, and we have all that dance and the scale of the look of it, I'm hearing something else. I don't know if you are. I'm hearing this. The Electric Waltz from Busby Berkeley's Gold Diggers of 1933, probably his best-known sequence. And so a tiny bit of Hollywood creeps into this Russian musical, and that's how we can see the genre working across international boundaries. The music is doing as much of the work as the visuals. But the movie's final scene was designed to outdo even Hollywood for tear-jerking drama, as the crowd embraces the circus star's mixed-race child to the strains of a tender lullaby.
Russia was very much supporting blacks and the anti-racist movement in America, and people like Paul Robeson were very popular in the country. So this was one of the tendencies. Of course, it was in a way hypocritical, because you can show how tolerant you are when there is no black population in the country.
Finally, the child is cradled by the Soviet Union's most famous Jewish actor, Solomon Michoels, singing in Yiddish.
The greatest Jewish actor in Russia. In 1948, he was murdered. He was considered to be an enemy of the state. And this image was cut out from Circus. After Stalin's death, the image was found in a copy, I think, in Poland, duplicated and returned into the film. Then there was another anti-Semitic tendency, and it was cut back off. So whenever the film was shown on television, many people from the intelligentsia, not only Jewish people, but many others, they watched the film for one single reason, to check whether Michoels is there or not. And this was an indicator of the Jewish question in Russia.
And just when you think it's all over, Stalinist cinema reverts to type with the final blast of sheer, blatant propaganda. There would be many more Soviet musicals in the wake of Circus, but none so politicized, nor so sophisticated. Whether a Soviet circus or a Broadway stage, movie musicals were traditionally set in a world of performance, where song and dance were a natural part of the action. But who would be the innovator who made bursting into song seem a natural part of the everyday world? Enter a Frenchman, René Clair. Clair was in many ways the last person you'd think of as a movie musical pioneer. His earliest films were silent collages of surreal imagery, very much intended to be art. But completely new form of screen drama, one in which the trials and tribulations of everyday life would be sung as much as spoken. There's not much to its simple plot. An impoverished artist wins a fortune in a lottery, but loses his winning ticket. In movie history, René Clair is credited with inventing the integrated musical, in which characters burst into song no matter how unnatural it may seem. Rhyme, if you like, without reasons, entirely captivating. It was also extremely influential. Its admirers included Charlie Chaplin, the Marx Brothers, and a young Hollywood director called Rouben Mamoulian. Mamoulian took the template of the integrated musical and brought it to Hollywood. And his breakthrough 1932 film Love Me Tonight opens on the rooftops of Paris. Now, where have we seen that before? Do you think René Clair's Le Million was in any way any kind of inspiration on Rouben Mamoulian when he was making Love Me Tonight?
There's no question that René Clair's Le Million was an influence, because he told me it was.
Have a listen to this rhythmic street symphony as Paris comes to life for the day.
Now, Mamoulian was quite a visionary. He loved music, and he understood rhythm and how rhythm in presenting a dramatic scene could save the use of words.
Oh, Amy. Oh, you're a magician. Isn't it romantic? My face is glowing. I'm energetic. The art of...
Mamoulian makes the integration of song into everyday life completely effortless, helped in no small part by the charisma of its star, Maurice Chevalier, playing a humble tailor with his sights set on marrying an aristocrat.
Like a sailor. No one will trust him. But there is magic in the music of my shears. I shed no tears. Lend me your ears. Isn't it romantic?
Unlike most Hollywood musicals of the early 1930s, Love Me Tonight doesn't keep its set piece until the end of the film. It brings it in pretty close to the beginning in order to set the tone for the whole movie. This is Isn't It Romantic?
Isn't it romantic? Da 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 da. A very catchy strain.
It is catchy for a reason, so that it can be handed from character to character, from geographical place to geographical place. Because people hear it and pick it up straight away.
At last I've got a fair.
Why is it catchy? Well, it uses the same note clusters again and again and again. That's the only change between line 1 and line 2. It's pretty much a repeat otherwise, so it goes straight in. It is catchy. And behind it is this wonderful relaxed bed. Very relaxed, very romantic, very French. He's a poor tailor, she's a great lady. Is there any way these two can come together? Well, only if you believe in romance, in movie musicals, and in the possibility of opposites attracting.
Your heart and my heart were made to be. Don't make them wait. Love me tonight.
Love Me Tonight is very likely the last major musical film in which the musical numbers were filmed and recorded at the same time. There was an orchestra on the set, not just a few pianos or something. It was a full orchestra on the set accompanying all the numbers. Of course, that could not have taken place when Love Me Tonight, the title song, was filmed, because it involves trick photography. And so that was pre-recorded.
Trick photography indeed, as Mamoulian daringly superimposed individual shots of the dreaming couple in their respective beds to suggest something altogether more racy.
Love me tonight.
Love Me Tonight really did push the boundaries of taste and decency, and what's come down to us today is 10 minutes shorter than what was released at the time. Amongst the elements lost to history are Myrna Loy's see-through nightdress, a double entendre about Virgin Springs, and a completely lost song called A Woman Needs Something Like That. Get this for a lyric. A doorbell needs tinkling, a flower needs sprinkling, and a woman needs something like that. That, folks, is a Hollywood musical before the age of censorship. By the early 1930s, Hollywood had enforced a strict code of production to crack down on the suggestive dialogue.
Come on now, let's get your clothes off.
And the risque costumes that have been so much a part of the movie musical's glamour and sophistication.
The code sets up high standards of performance for motion picture producers.
From now on, studios would have to submit scripts and songs for approval in advance of production. With Hollywood now firmly policed, where could the musical continue to show song and dance in full sensuous glory? Across the pond, in Paris, the city of liberation and anything goes. And it was an American who wowed audiences like no other, Josephine Baker. In an age of segregation and few prospects for a female black artist, Baker had left the US in 1925. She became an overnight sensation and the toast of Parisian cabarets. It was only a matter of time before Baker became as much a star of the screen as she was of the stage. And with her feature film debut in 1934's Zuzu, boy did she. Her charismatic personality and sinuous dance moves were captured with a louche freedom that would have been unthinkable in Hollywood at those times. One of Zuzu's key scenes is an extraordinary shadow dance where Baker puts in an electric performance that, in its ecstatic abandon, sums up her star quality.
Sit firm.
Unlike in Circus or Hallelujah, race is not an issue in this movie. Tragedy certainly is. Baker loses the man she loves, but in the startling climactic number in which she appears as a bird in a cage, clad only in feathers, the feeling is much more of strength and defiance than of heartbreak. How could Hollywood compete with this? Well, by stealth. By making dance itself the outward expression of character, of heightened emotion, especially of sensuality. And nowhere was this more in evidence than in the great master of fancy footwork himself, Fred Astaire. Astaire took the physicality of dance and spun it into a new, unique form of storytelling. His dazzling charisma and seemingly effortless movement set the screen alight. The movie musical had arguably found its greatest star to date.
To me, he's the big unsung genius of choreography. It's still astonishing when you watch now those solos. There's so much detail, so much complexity. Try and find anyone on film with that complexity of rhythm in their dances and their solos. It just doesn't happen ever again in movie musical history.
Astaire's talent emerged at an early age. He and his equally talented sister Adele had been earmarked for a successful stage career. Beginning when he was 5 and she was 8, together they formed a vaudeville double act that lasted 27 years until Adele married and put her dancing years behind her. Fred was, for now at least, a solo performer.
She didn't want to work anymore, and it wasn't easy to get her to rehearse, and I'd say, oh, we ought to try that step over, and she said, still, I was moaning Minnie.
Because Astaire believed his exceptional solo dances should be shot full frame and in long takes, these step-perfect performances were an achievement in stamina as much as artistry. But don't just take my word for it. Stephen McRae is a principal dancer with the Royal Ballet in London. He is also a master in the Astaire style of tap. What's he looking for in the music in order to sort of create that tap?
I honestly wish I could be inside of his head and tell you his exact honest answer. All I can see from watching that is obviously he's an incredible dancer, but a musician as well. There's a lot of style and a huge amount of technique involved in what he's doing. He is quite an illusionist. He makes you believe that you can get up and do it as well.
This wonderful moment where he was basically doing
the sound of it is almost like a train. It gives the illusion that he's skimming the floor.
Astaire also looked for ways to break up the sound of the taps, tapping on something other than the floor, and claps as well.
He would have tried to have been percussion, really, with his whole body. So incorporating a wall or a clap, so something like... To me, he demonstrates that tapping is a chance of adding another instrument to the orchestra.
I'm always interviewed, and they say, well, what are your favorite films? What do you think are the most important films? I could really, look good by saying, well, my favorite film is really Grand Illusion, and it's all about the hierarchy, the wealthy and the powerful, and not really the flags of nations, but more, and I could sound pretty good. I could sound smart. However, my truly favorite films are American musicals starring Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, because they satisfy your soul.
Fred and Ginger, shorthand for movie magic. Ginger Rogers' wisecracking elegance was the perfect foil to Astaire's prim perfectionism.
When you see a workman, you see Mr. Astaire. You say, is he hard to work with, and am I hard to work with? If you like people who like their work and who work at their work, then we're hard workmen. He is, I am, and we're very definite about what we like and what we dislike.
I just want to pay tribute to Ginger because we did so many pictures together, and believe me, it was a value to have that gal. Woo! She had it.
Together, they formed an electric partnership that remains undimmed after more than 80 years.
I don't get goosebumps like I get with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Isn't it a lovely day to be caught in the rain?
Isn't this a lovely day to be caught in the rain?
In a Hollywood now firmly in the grip of the film code, the thrill of the chase and the path of seduction are brilliantly conveyed through some of the greatest song and dance numbers in movie musical history.
Just as you were going, leaving me all at...
The thing to remember with Top Hat is the songs that plot their relationship growing and the closeness between them. And of course, with dance, that closeness is physical. You actually can see. So when we have that first wonderful number, Isn't It a Lovely Day to Be Caught in the Rain, they actually don't touch at all. They dance, and they dance in a kind of playful way, and it's a very playful song. They're like a couple of kids, and they're jumping around, they're competing with each other. Everything Fred does, Ginger then has to do, and then Ginger starts to do it better than Fred. And by the end, with the next thunderclap, kaboom, it changes the whole speed that they're going. And at the end, they sit down like kids, big gap between them, cross-legged, laughing. This is just play. This is just fooling about. When we get to cheek, it's a different matter.
I'm in heaven.
Because he's lost Ginger in the meantime, and he's got to win her back again. It's very easy, slow, seductive. But then, the great announcement of his real love. And at that moment, he breaks away from her and sings out to her.
Dance with me. I want my arm about you. The charm about you will carry me through.
And then he takes her in his arms again, and all the time that's been going on, the two of them have been dancing together further and further away from the crowd at the party. Until now he takes her out into their own space, their boudoir, in which they can consummate this relationship. And boy do they, as dance.
There's something about allowing dance to do what it does, which is very, very rare these days. Allowing dance to say something. Those scenes are more romantic, more sexy than any spoken scene, I think, of that era. There's something profound about them.
And at the end, they both move back to that back wall and lean in the most post-coital way a post-code movie could possibly suggest. By the time Rodgers and Astaire became bona fide superstars, the movie musical had become a surefire Hollywood staple. But where could it go next? How could it continue to innovate and surprise? The movie musical had been thriving for nearly a decade, but with nothing particularly new or innovative in the last few years. But then, Walt Disney announced he was going to make the world's first full-length animated feature film. This was quite a risk, not only because nobody had made a movie like that before, but they couldn't be absolutely sure that an audience would sit in front of a cartoon for 70 to 80 minutes. Walt argued that if the songs and the characters were strong enough, the movie would be a surefire hit. Taking an old Brothers Grimm fairy story, the Disney Studios created the most ambitious musical ever conceived, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. A regular live-action movie musical was usually shot in a few weeks, but Snow White's production would take 3 full years. Walt Disney was literally betting everything, including his own house, on Snow White being a success.
This pompous-looking individual is Doc, the self-appointed leader of the group. And this little fellow is bashful. He's secretly in love with Snow White. And Happy here with the beaming smile. And old Sourpuss here is Grumpy, the woman hater. And last but not least is Dopey. He's nice, but sort of silly.
It took 750 artists, 32 animators, 25 background artists, and 102 assistants to bring the magic to the screen. But as soon as it was released, that magic was impossible to ignore.
My mother decided I had to see Snow White the day it opened. And it was a fairy tale come to life before my eyes. It was just a wonder. I mean, imagine a whole movie just for children.
Slave in the magic mirror, come from the farthest space.
Even at the age of 3, were you walking out of the cinema with the tune still in your head?
Oh, yes, of course. Oh, my goodness. Hi-ho? Everybody knew hi. I didn't know anybody who didn't know hi-ho in my great social circle of 3- and 4-year-olds.
When you start to begin to unpack the songs in Snow White, you begin to notice something rather strange. Think about Whistle While You Work.
So hum a merry tune. It won't take long when there's a song to help you set the pace.
I'm not hearing 30s Hollywood here. What I'm hearing is 19th century German operetta. These songs are coming out of the fairy tale world, Hans Christian Andersen and everything else. What's making them work for us is the performance, because this is a unique performance we've never seen before.
Someday my prince will come.
An animated character is selling these songs. You will absolutely believe that a voice can become a fully rounded human being just with a few strokes of a great animator's pen. Aided, no doubt, by the haunting voice of teenager Andrea Casalotti in the title role, Disney's gamble paid off handsomely. Snow White would become one of the highest-grossing films of all time. Other Hollywood studios cottoned on that the fantasy musical might be a new path to box office gold, none more so than MGM, who took their own gamble by casting a very young Judy Garland as the lead in their most lavish musical production to date, The Wizard of Oz.
Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
As Garland's Dorothy finds herself transported to a full-blown fantasy land, this was the Hollywood musical upping the game yet again.
We must be over the rainbow.
In the course of just 10 years, the movie musical had travelled from Broadway to the world of pure imagination, but it was about to face its biggest challenge to date. Just 2 weeks after the premiere of The Wizard of Oz, war broke out in Europe. In a world plunged into chaos, how could the all-singing, all-dancing movie musical survive?
New York, New York, a wonderful
Next time, the Hollywood musical enters its second golden age,
in a hole in the ground. New York, New York.
and song and dance becomes crucial to the magic of Indian cinema.